Well, it appears that these claims and counterclaims may be just a small part of what's happening at the Unemployment Insurance Fund. Business Unity South Africa saying it's gravely concerned about what it calls systemic dysfunction at the Unemployment Insurance Fund. Natalie Singer is Business Unity South Africa's representative on the NEDLAC Unemployment Insurance Subcommittee. Natalie, good afternoon to you. You've been very critical of what's been happening at the UIF. What do you believe is going wrong?
Thank you, Stephen, and good afternoon to your viewers. Unfortunately, the UIF, I think, like many state organizations, has fallen behind when it comes to technological advancements. And this creates opportunities potentially where not only does it negatively affect service delivery to beneficiaries in terms of delays and other frustrations, but where it potentially leaves loopholes available to individuals with nefarious intentions to take advantage.
In other words, there's a lot of scope for corruption. In other words, how people receive payments, who gets payments, where the money actually goes.
Potentially, yes, absolutely. I think there have been movements certainly in the last couple of years, and I think COVID-19 too created a bit of a wake-up call in that sense. I know, for example, that there are checks and balances in place now before they can make a payment into somebody's account. So even for a maternity claim or, unemployment insurance. And I think these are all steps that the UIF is trying to take to curb any opportunities for corruption to take place.
There's several complaints that you hear all the time around the UIF. The one is that someone will say, I've applied for the grant, I didn't get the grant. That can be a consequence of checks and balances, and you need to have those. But it can also sometimes be just too difficult for people to get the money, and for them, it's only 350 Rand, but boy, it's the difference between life and death.
Absolutely. So, again, I think very often there is an over-reliance on manual documentation. And again, it's that fine balance, isn't it, between ensuring that we have adequate information to be able to make a good decision. Is this a person who actually qualifies for the benefit? Are they who they say they are? And are we going to be paying the right people? But also, I think perhaps the difficulty is that for many individuals, and certainly those who are unemployed or those with small children, babies who are trying to get maternity, to still be reliant on having to do things quite manually, and then very often having to resubmit documentation because there isn't a centralized system currently which every UIF official can tap into. So when I speak to somebody today, they need the information, and so they ask us to email it. We email it again. They have it for the moment, and then we don't hear back. And then the next time we follow up, we're speaking to somebody else, and we begin the process over and over. I think following our calls, which were obviously quite public, and the statement to which you refer from earlier in October, we have been encouraged by the reach out from the Minister. We did have a meeting, the social partners, including the Minister of Employment and Labour, and wherein they opened to us around the plans around modernisation, not only for the UIF, but for the Compensation Fund, which has similar challenges in terms of its issues around administration and facilitation of claims. And where there is a plan which looks hopeful, there was acknowledgement, I think, from the ministry that a big part of the challenges emanate from the lack of IT infrastructure, and certainly IT infrastructure which we know is capable. If we look at the private sector in insurance, etc., there are many checks and balances that are in place using systems which utilize automation, which are able to use, PDF document reading and other things, which we hope will now be incorporated. And whilst that's positive, it still is a longish term horizon, probably the next 3 years before we see any real material change. And so whilst that is positive, and particularly the agreement to have a structure under NEDLAC, which will include social partners right from the beginning, so that we get, the right people giving inputs from a private sector perspective around systems and how those should interact with payrolls and other things which are critical to compliance from an employer's perspective, but also to make it easy for beneficiaries when they want to claim. We want to make sure that we get that right first off, so that as opposed to what's unfortunately happened in the past, a system gets developed and it's only once it rolls out that there is then the disconnect. disconnect that happens between modern systems and those that have been developed in-house. Sadly, of course, what we're still waiting on is the action plan around what do we do in the interim. So how do we help people get unblocked who are currently blocked now? What are we going to put in place to help those move faster?
There's so many aspects to it. And I mean, for businesses, this has a huge impact as well. I mean, they often have to deal with the UIF. They have workers who they have to look after. They have to make payments. And so it has an impact on business. It takes up businesses' time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think unfortunately causes a lot of employer-employee aggravation, which shouldn't really be there. So, somebody goes off to claim maternity, they get to the UIF, and then they're told by the UIF that your employer hasn't declared you, and it's their fault that you can't be processed. And whilst I'm sure there are some employers who haven't been as diligent as they should be, and certainly we call for compliance in all aspects, but many times when they referred back to the employer has evidence of having made the submissions religiously, and somewhere in the system talking to the system or something happening manually on the other side of the UIF, the data's got lost. And so we end up with this he said, she said, and all it does is create frustration for all parties and a waste of time and resources which we don't really have readily available in today's fast-paced world.
Natalie Singer, thank you. The Business Unity South Africa representative on the NEDLAC Unemployment Insurance Subcommittee. Really appreciate the time.